All right, well, Tyler, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Welcome, welcome, welcome. DevOps days in Alabama, how about it, right? This has got to be the greatest summation of DevOps talent to ever happen in the state of Alabama. I would like for y'all just to take a moment, give yourself a round of applause, please. Yep. Awesome, awesome. I'm seriously curious how many people in the state of Alabama even know what DevOps means. I think that, sometimes I question myself what DevOps means because it seems like it, kind of rotates daily almost. And I think that's okay. But if you can't tell by my accent, I'm actually, I grew up not that far from here. And it's in a little place known as the backwoods. Most of you probably drove through it on your way to get here. And if you don't know about the backwoods, right outside the backwoods, there is typically farmland, right? And this is kind of where I want to start my speech. I think there's a lot of similarities between cultivating a DevOps culture and cultivating this farmland. To generally sum up what I'm talking about here is cultivation is the process in which this pre-work is applied to the soil in order to optimize the growth potential of crops by allowing for the retention and penetration of air, water, and nutrients, right? And I'm by no means an agricultural scientist, so, I've only had success at growing dead plants in my office window. So y'all please don't scrutinize that too much. But I think it's safe to assume that many of you are here today because you're wanting to use DevOps to increase your yield, right? And I say that to make a point that oftentimes we're focusing so much on the tools for the job rather than the soil itself. So I want to start by saying, you see, sometimes you don't need a bigger tractor. You just need better soil, okay? And the soil or the foundation of DevOps is collaboration, ultimately. This is very evident by the name itself, Dev plus Ops, right? And development and operations, working together. I think many of us here realize that that line is not so clear sometimes, and that it can be many other things. I find myself sometimes not knowing which side of the fence I'm on and playing a couple different sides. But, we have development and operations, right? And then sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit of security. I'm a little bit of SRE. A little bit of QA, sometimes janitorial services if needed, and then, part of the dumpster fire department, it seems like, quite frequently. And, that's basically what DevOps is that it's a cross-discipline that encompasses many different practices into one, right? And companies looking to implement a DevOps culture or DevOps tools or any of these things, they must be able to navigate these existing cultural differences in order to facilitate this cross-team collaboration. And that's basically what I do on a day-to-day basis. That's if someone was asking me what my job was, it was to basically help and navigate these differences in order to make everyone work better together. So, on to the next one. So give you a little bit of idea about my background. I work for a company called StratusGrid that's based out of Chattanooga. It was actually founded here in Birmingham, believe it or not, and I'm a cloud infrastructure lead. I joined StratusGrid about 4 years ago as a junior engineer with zero experience and began my professional career 100% remotely. Back in those days, that was kind of PC, right? I like to call it PC as pre-COVID. And we're eventually going to get to AC, trust me. But working remotely was not so common yet. And I remember people looking at me strange whenever I tell them, I work from home, I'm a junior engineer. They'll be like, you do what? Is he lying to us? Yeah, but I immediately began to get the taste of some of the challenges that we run into across, our organizations and different fields. So first thing I started to experience was that getting help and sharing knowledge remotely was like super difficult. Reflecting back, it's a struggle that I sometimes compared to a cheese grater to the face. But what I found as I got the opportunity to work with various organizations and clients was that it was a pretty common situation across the industry. Like everyone kind of has that issue working remotely. So I was just fortunate enough to be one of the lucky ones at StratusGrid to pioneer and get to go through this initial learning process. And that actually gave me a good side of, skills and insights into be able to help our clients as we've kind of developed into, COVID situations, and our team moving forward to, eliminate some of these burdens. So let's look at this. So, see, most of y'all merely adopted remote work, following COVID. I was born by it. I was raised in this kind of framework. So, when it comes to help and knowledge sharing, I'm sure many of you are aware of by now what is, fundamentally required to be successful remotely. However, for the sake of this presentation, I'm still going to give brief explanations for some of the things, just so I can build upon them further down the road and get into some more advanced collaboration techniques, if that's okay with y'all. So yeah, fundamentally required. We have channels for help. That's pretty simple, basic, straightforward. We have documentation spaces. We have virtual meetings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at more advanced techniques, such as technical help request guides, virtual whiteboarding sessions, navigational aids, and response coordination. So first and foremost, I'm going to touch on spaces for help. This is typically done through Slack channels. I'm sure many of y'all are familiar with doing this, but all it does is provide people a known location to be able to reach out and ask for help. I think we've all been there sometimes where we don't know who to ask or when to ask necessarily for assistance, and that's what this right here, foundational piece does. On to the next one. And then we start talking about documentation spaces, and I'm sure all y'all's documentation spaces are immaculate, and everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's very organized. I would find nothing to be concerned about there, but it's really the lifeblood of your knowledge base, and it's super important. These spaces are kind of designed to be living documents that multiple users can review, revise, maintain fairly easily, right? And I've added here a couple of types of documents. Most of them are kind of self-explanatory, but the one I want to touch on a little bit is incubator spaces. I don't know how many of y'all are doing this or know what this even is, so I'll kind of give an explanation. But an incubator space is basically a space where you begin to capture ideas for your team. This space is where anybody can submit an idea, and the idea of the incubator space is to essentially keep the idea warm or under incubation. That's how that works. Until it's ready to hatch. So it's really a good spot for collaborative innovation to kind of begin. I'm really passionate about that. I could go into a whole nother speech about that one day, but let's move on. Virtual meetings. I'm sure y'all are all super excited about this one and love this. But the matter of the fact here is that some people feel uncomfortable reaching out in publicly visible Slack channels or having to type out their, messages and say, hey, can you help me look at this? Or I have this error and I don't know what to do. It makes some people feel uncomfortable. So in order to account for that, having dedicated working sessions periodically or jumping in on calls with individuals as possible to better address their issues is always helpful in my experience, but it's pretty simple overall. Just out of curiosity, by a raise of hands, how many of y'all are using Zoom? Cool. How many of y'all are using Google Meet? Cool. And I assume the rest of you are using Microsoft Teams, and that's the first thing we need to fix. Got you. All right. So now we're going to start diving into some of the more advanced topics that I've been able to implement and work with clients as well as internally to kind of develop. I'm talking about here a guide for requesting technical help. When I say a guide, it is not a policy that is firm and set in stone that everyone has to follow when they ask for help. I'm not going to tell you, no, I can't help you, go answer these questions, because first and foremost, that's rude, and that's not building collaboration. And then secondly, it's just a list of questions that kind of provide a framework for you, yourself, to be able to better understand what you're trying to solve sometimes, because oftentimes, we're missing a piece that we probably could have used to help ourselves, or as we provide this context to someone else, what it does is allows them to quickly ingest it and be able to better assist us and solve our problems more easily and more expedited. So, and then at the end of the day, if you ask this inside of a Slack channel or something like that, and you feel like you look dumb, then you can blame it on the guide. So, and you don't have to feel dumb yourself. So, the effect of this has been tremendous. We've had, problems being solved faster. We've had people requesting help more frequently, and we've also had people actually telling us that they go through the guide themselves, and then they realize halfway through, oh man, I've figured it out. I have the answer now. So, yeah, let's move on to the next one. Virtual whiteboarding sessions. I think virtual whiteboarding and mind mapping sessions are amazing. These sessions kind of take a little bit of skill to get used to, because essentially what you are doing is you are taking a tool such as Lucidchart and in real time diagramming out what is being said in conversation, and in respect to basically the solution or the software, whatever you're working on. So maybe you tell me that you have an API gateway. I'll throw an API gateway up. The API gateway is pointing to this specific path for this specific Lambda, and then from there I'm diagramming all this up in real time. And what that does is that provides, for instance, feedback. First and foremost, if I'm wrong, someone would be like, hey, your diagram's wrong. That's not what I said, don't do that. And then also it provides, the ability for people to have that visual aid and be able to really dive into, okay, now I see how this makes sense. It looks like we're broken at this spot because we're missing, a WAF rule or something along those lines. And when it comes to mind mapping, it's very similar. It's just in regards to kind of innovation aspect of that, but it allows users to kind of see the idea take shape. And when the idea kind of starts to take shape before your eyes, you get more ideas. That's what I've tend to experience overall. But Lucidchart is inevitably becomes a piece of your documentation after you do this. You then have good diagrams because you've worked as a team to do this and figure this out. It always helps. It also helps for troubleshooting incidents. I find that people will get on an incident with me and they'll be like, this is broke here, but I don't know what's going on. Well, what's his upstream dependencies? What's his downstream dependencies? And which one are we missing? What's potentially causing the problem? So yeah, let's move on. Visual aids. I love this topic because this is about the documentation. I'm sure all of y'all follow a very strict naming guideline that's always polished, and everything's tagged accordingly as well. But it's really important. If you follow naming conventions, if you follow these tagging conventions, then it will help you much more easily collaborate. So a couple of examples that I can give you that I like to use relatively simple is when I'm tagging stuff inside of AWS, especially things that are deployed with infrastructure as code, for example, is I'm just going to put a tag for the infrastructure as code repo on that resource. It's so simple, but it helps me so many times because I'll be questioning where's the code that manages this. And then what happens if you don't have that is people will go in and they'll want to just make a manual change, and then it'll be like, oh man, why? Now we have to go update the code, and it just adds another step altogether. If people see that tag, then they can quickly know hey, I should go make this change here and submit it through the process for the software development lifecycle and these sorts of things. It's pretty reliable too, and it's, almost an effortless thing that we can do to overall build collaboration, as well as, you take services that are deployed inside of AWS or inside of any of these clouds, and you apply the service name as a tag, you apply the Slack channel to reach out to those people. So if everything blows up at 2 a.m. on a Sunday night, you will know exactly who to wake up. And that's usually the quickest way to get help. So yeah. And segueing from that into response coordination, okay? Oftentimes, back in the early days of kind of all this is people didn't have systems to summon the masses. They didn't have the conch horn to blow and scream for people to come and help and that sort of thing. So it's really important to kind of develop those. We use OpsGenie, and we also use automated notifications. So we define and we set out basic blanket metrics that we can alarm off of, and then we kind of filter them back to be more actionable as we go. But it'll alarm the right people as first responders, and then from the right people getting alarmed, then you can go and escalate it to be an incident and rate the severity to really pull in more people as needed. And then you develop a process surrounding tracking this as well. Maybe it's a dedicated channel inside of, Slack or inside of one of these different, chat apps that you have where everyone has a visibility. It's really important to have transparency and visibility into this stuff, as knowing what has been done, what's happening, and who is working on it is super important. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes when things go off and I don't hear any response, I get a little bit nervous, and I'm thinking, oh man, what's happening? But this channel kind of provides that so that you can get that instant feedback and know like, oh man, they're on it. Thanks so much, guys. And then you get the opportunity from this sort of collaboration and communication efforts to start doing things such as like retros and RCAs. I don't know how many of y'all have had RCAs that's had follow-up tasks that's never got done. I'm sure none of you have. That doesn't happen. All the follow-up tasks always get done. But generally, as this collaboration kind of takes hold as a group and as a team, what you'll see is that everyone will be willing to participate. Everyone will be willing to play their part and really kind of get things going. But yeah, initially, what's on the roadmap? I think that's something that many of us struggle with. Most organizations are all in a different state. I've worked with various clients. Every time I come into an organization, the first thing I do is sit back and I evaluate by the way they communicate to each other and by the way they help each other and assist each other, and systems that they have in place to kind of facilitate that, to determine their level of state. And what I've identified through doing that is basically that there's a roadmap that you can kind of follow that anyone can pick up at about any time and be pretty successful at getting some ground and going on some of these initiatives. First and foremost, you need an advocate. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I'm usually actively the advocate. All it is someone who truly cares, right? It's someone who truly cares about the success of the organization as a whole. And if you really, really, really want to start breaking it down and looking at it in more details, their job is to be a catalyst, right? Their job is to be the person that provides fuel for the fire. And, you can change the tide of culture one battle at a time and one team at a time. And this doesn't have to be someone with the name manager in their title. Literally, I started this a long time ago as a junior engineer. And I just felt like I didn't want no one else to get the cheese grater to the face when they went through the things that I had to face in the very beginning. So that's kind of how I've, got to where I'm at. And it doesn't have to be someone with the greatest technical skills. It doesn't have to be someone with the greatest experience or anything like that. It just needs to be someone willing to start building these gaps and meaningful relationships across the teams and the individuals among them. One second. Awesome. So what I say is the first thing on the roadmap is to start small. You got to control what you control. I know that's kind of cliche and we've all heard it before, but start with your team. That's usually the path of least resistance overall, is that you usually have someone on your team that you interact with pretty frequently. Go and clear up your documentation space, make it better. As you make yours better, people will be like, oh man, I want to copy that and emulate that success that they've had, because what they've done makes me look bad whenever mine's all messy and when my naming schemes are messy. And then slowly you start building this foundation through people wanting to basically emulate the success you're having across the board. And the key here is to remember that it's all about people. I find quite frequently when I do things such as like the whiteboarding sessions or the mind mapping, is that people will reach out to me and be like, hey, can you do that for our team? And you really need to just go and help them because they don't have the skills yet. I'm not necessarily going to show them and carry the torch for them and do all the mind mapping and do these kind of whiteboarding sessions. But what I will do is I will provide them the templates of all the diagrams that I have and give them a good idea of how to structure these things so that they can, begin practicing and toning them skills themselves and working with them on actually, being a mentor and pushing them in the right direction. You'll find oftentimes that people will kind of carry the torch for you on other initiatives. So you might be working here, and then they'll carry the torch over here, and then y'all come back together and be like, oh man, that's incredible. We're actually getting some things done. So yeah, so I think it's super important, and it's probably one of the most understated aspects of all this, is that you are inevitably going to have some failures, but you're going to fail fast. Right, that's the key here. Is you want to fail fast, you want to adapt, and you want to overcome. Just like kind of tilling the field in the beginning. I told you I'm not going to touch too much on that anymore. But it's a labor of love. It really does take a special type of person to go through some of the resistance and some of these things that wears on you. It'll beat you up. If y'all are anything like me, then in the middle of the night, I'm constantly thinking about how can I help my team? How can I make my team better? What do we have to do to get this initiative off the ground and get things going here, and start evaluating those sorts of things. And it's always about inspecting what you've already done and then making improvements, redirecting course, and firing again. And you just do that over and over until you're successful. And just remember that it's all about people. I'm going to end right here with this essentially and be done. But it's about celebrating the victories. You got to radiate your success. So if you've been working to basically accelerate, development, accelerate these things, present metrics, present dashboards to show and illuminate that for others to see, so that you can say, hey, we did this. We saved the company $20,000, or they saved the company $20,000. They implemented these procedures so we could develop this much faster. They improved this process so that this application didn't take 12 seconds to load. Now it only takes 18 milliseconds. And it's really, really, really important to do that, because people won't want to work with someone who takes all the credit. You don't need to take the credit. You need to celebrate others, and that's why I'm going to end on this note and say, thank you, Savannah. Thank you, team in Spain, for staying up with me and telling me to go to bed at the middle of the night. And I appreciate everything that y'all have done for me, and I'll end there. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Tyler. That was awesome. I think PJ also, when he was speaking yesterday, was talking about how, DevOps is communication, at first. And there's an author, I think, Steven Spear, who talks in the High Velocity Edge about, for a high velocity team, you have to be able to spread your knowledge. It's not enough to fix the problems, to do better. You also have to teach the next generation to do that. So I think your talk was amazing, and talk to that. So next we have